Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a good evening. This is part 3 of my revisiting the Ivalice series, and same as with the previous one, I'm gonna split this in two because I think this video is gonna be long as it is because there's a funny little quest in this one. So the pattern for these videos, by the way, is gonna be basically cutscene, then after a cutscene or a series of cutscenes, I'm gonna basically like recap what happened events. So because otherwise it's kind of pointless to do a commentary if I'm just gonna be mute all the time. So yeah, I'm gonna be still giving some commentary. So when it comes to this part, whenever I'm just unlocking something, it obviously has less commentary because I'm not going through the instance itself. So just keep that in mind. But I think I'm gonna add like some timestamps in the description for easier reference. everything. Oh, is okay, so this dude right here. So this is basically someone who, oh, he's not mentioning it now, but he's basically this this guy who like really brainwashed by Garlemald. Maybe not really brainwashed, but he basically tries to paint everything they do in a good light. Like if you speak to him throughout this raid series, like he's very patriotic and all that. And let's just say, just remember him. He's gonna do something later on. He's gonna reappear. Take a shortcut, why not? I'm pausing the video here to just say that I done goofed. I basically lost. I won't bore you with the details, but basically I lost some footage, and basically all I lost was the wine quest for the most part and the red chocobo, but that's fine, because to be honest it's easier if I just briefly summarize what I wanted to talk about there. So they were basically both just something that this raid series was notorious for. So the red chocobo, when you went there, you would start this encounter, you spawn 2 of them, they would spam this choco meteor AoE. And the reason it was it was a nightmare was because imagine you have like 50 people there spamming these chocobos, like spawning them over and over. You have like a shit ton of them loose. It was amusing, but it was also for some people really frustrating on launch. And yeah, so that's a funny little thing. The other one was the wine quest, which is a lot of people hated. Not just because when you decline his offer, he just basically forces you to comply to him, but also because it's just like people's thing. Like even though it was kind of short, excuse me, people didn't weren't happy with it, and there is a they do rectify it later on, because they added this fun little side quest later on, which I'm definitely gonna be doing. But as of now, I think it's I was gonna skip it anyway, like give timestamps to skip it, so this is okay. You really didn't miss much. So yeah, all the relevant story is still in the video, so nothing of big value was lost. I also mentioned that the Wandering Dramaturge is basically like similar to Yoshida being the Wandering Minstrel. That's Matsuno's basically avatar in game. So if you ever wonder like why is he there and what's his character like, that's supposed to be the idea there. That's why he has like so much exposition and such. Yeah, that's about it. Anyway, back to the video. Alright, so we unlocked Ridorana, and as with the previous part, I'm gonna split them up. However, there's still some things to discuss before it. So first of all, again to summarize the cutscene, we find out that Bagamnan and his crew failed to protect Princess Ashelia, who is, by the way, let's be honest, still alive. And there's a new entry in the diary, Pharaoh's Ridorana. So basically we just make the assumption that Bagamnan had went there and we follow him. He then turns into Lucavi by the same Duma aura site that turned out as well, and then yeah, next up we have to enter Pharaoh's Ridorana. And it's also worth mentioning the explosion they were talking about in Gog. It came from a battle between Ramza and Construct 8, during which there was an errant discharge from Construct 8's weapons that rent the city asunder, and that affected the etheric flow around the place, which forced the inhabitants to leave. And geographically, it makes sense that they went north to Ilsabard, which will make them the settlers for what eventually becomes Garlemald, as was explained just now. Okay, so this video is almost already an hour in length, but I thought this would be a good thing to add at this point, because they're talking a lot about Dalmasca and such, so it might be worth going over some of the lore bits. Now when I did the research for it, there was a ton of lore for Dalmasca. I was actually surprised by it, but I'm gonna try my best to briefly summarize both the flavor bits and all the relevant points. So, Dalmasca, it was a hub of international trade which made it desirable to conquer, but the Beanargin royal line had been defending the nation successfully for 1,000 years. It's worth noting, however, that Ramza called Rabanastre an antediluvian city, which basically translates to before the flood, which in turn implies that the city was around for even longer than a millennia. Rather, it was only ruled by the Beanargin royal line for that duration, but it had in fact existed since before the 6th Umbral Calamity, more than 1600 years ago. This makes sense, timeline-wise, as it would place Ivalice, the civilization that Dalmasca was built upon, to be a 5th Astral Era civilization. Geographically, Dalmasca is surrounded by mountains, which made it difficult to invade over the millennia. You can picture Switzerland basically as a reference in the real world. There's only 2 overland trade routes between the continents of Ilsabard and Otard, which are basically Garlemald and the east, those being the Burn and the Dalmasca Desert. Needless to say, this made Dalmasca pretty prosperous as a waypoint from merchants, and indeed the reason Rabanastre became to be known as the Desert Sapphire was because they had amassed such a rich collection of rare goods from both the east and the west. Even when Gur-Abanian navigation techniques improved, Dalmasca held all the shipping lanes and continued to prosper. Just like in 12, the desert is so large, it's split into parts, basically the Ester Sands and the Wester Sands. Of course, Ivalice once stood atop the lands we now call Dalmasca, as we found out in the first part. Post-conquest, it was split in 2 parts, basically. Dalmasca Superior and Dalmasca Inferior. Superior was the desert part in the south, with Rabanastre as its capital, and Inferior had the Golmor Jungle and Grelix Bend, and its capital was in Liamonde, which is a reference to Vagrant Story, of course. Nice to see some of those around. Dalmasca was really racially diverse, and after a lot of violent disputes caused by racial differences, they adopted this kind of philosophy of live and let live to avoid pointless conflicts in the future. The rule was basically that you could have your own ethical, moral standards, As long as you don't break any laws, it's fine. Their national flag came to be the Sun Crest, which was the Binargin's royal coat of arms. The family's coat of arms, rather. The Sun Crest is, of course, a reference to the Sun Crest in FF12, which was this large fragment of netherite made by the Okuria and stored in Ridorana in that game. The Okuria chose people as dynasty kings to use the 3D blade to create fragments from the Sun Crest, and in 12 Ash or Ashelia was one of the chosen dynasty kings. So while it's only a reference by name in 14, it's still pretty fitting in my opinion. Needless to say, the flag was banned from use by the Garleans. Dalmasca also was ruled by the Blue Council, but we don't know much about them other than that they were under the king's authority. So the Empire, once Emet-Selch had created the Garlean Empire, one of the first conquests for it was, of course, as we knew, Dalmasca. And as I mentioned before, it was a nation surrounded by mountains, so that's what kept it from being conquered over the centuries. But with the advent of the airship, of course, it fell pretty effortlessly to the Empire, to the point that only Nalbina Fortress remained, which was laid siege for half a year by the 4th Legion under Gapran. But it was only a matter of time, really, before the Nalbina Fortress fell too. Prince Rasler and his twin sister, Princess Ashelia, also perished, and the regent conceded the crown. Now the regent died shortly after, and we don't know whether it's by suicide or assassination, which basically meant the end of the Binargin line, and this in turn marked the end of the kingdom of Dalmasca as it was known during its millennia lasting reign. The reason Nalbina Fortress didn't fall so easily is actually pretty interesting, because they managed to put up a magical barrier in time to forestall the air assault. Another reason I find it interesting is because it could be the same thing as a paling in FF12. So in 12, palings are basically used to protect cities from aerial assaults, and are held up by magic from powerful crystals or magicite by a group of chanting priests. But it could also be elegant technology similar to the Serious wall that we use in 4.5. After conquering Dalmasca, the Empire used Rabanastre as a key staging ground for expanding, of course, in the rest of Othard. And next was something I hate to pronounce, Nagsia, which did not fall as easily as Dalmasca, because it played out pretty similarly to our real-life equivalent would be the Vietnam War, where even though they were overall weaker in strength and numbers, plus they weren't even unified, the local resistance was able to cause some serious damage to the Garleans by taking advantage of the dense jungle climbs. But after about 3 years, Naxia fell too, which meant their road to conquest Yangtze and the Doma Kingdom were pretty much wide open. Now, Dalmasca did try uprisings, like in Doma and Alamigo, but to much less success. Eventually the Empire just got so tired of trying to make the nation work, and instead just started mass executing people without trial and hunting down resistance leaders under the command of Livius as Junius, when the 4th Legion needed help from Gaius and his 4th team. This is where Livia gained her reputation for the most part, which earned the nickname the Witch of Dalmasca. Eventually they even nuked the crap out of Rabanastre, which resulted in the royal city becoming the ruinous mess it was when we saw when visiting it. However, and this is a direct quote from the lore book, yet from beneath the smoldering rubble did rise the inhuman cries of demons long imprisoned, darkness of their own making, the Mukavi were captive no more. At the moment, as of 5.2, Dalmasca has a lot of infighting within their resistance factions. Fran and Lente's Tears resistance group are trying to make them unified, cooperating, getting refugees safely across the borders. And once that's done, as Fran put it, there is still the war to be fought. Well, in patch 5.25 we'll probably see more of what's happening in, like, with regards to Dalmasca. That's basically it in a nutshell. Yahoo!